Thank you very much, Ian, for the introduction, and thank you, Erko, for presenting the framework, and I will refer to some parts of that in my own presentation. We all know how micro, small, and medium enterprises play an important role in the Philippine economy, basically because they provide jobs and because they come up with new products and services that address a variety of our social needs. According to the Philippine Statistics Authority, there are about 1 million business establishments in the Philippines in 2019. And about 99.5% of these establishments belong to the MSME sector. And out of these, 89% or 890,000 establishments are micro enterprises, 10% or almost 100,000 are small businesses, and 0.5% are medium enterprises. In terms of industry sector, 46.2% of MSMEs belong to wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, 14.4% belong to accommodation and food service activities, and 11.5% belong to the manufacturing sector. About 16.2% come from other industries such as information and communication, human health and social work activities, education, arts, entertainment and recreation, real estate activities, transport and storage, agriculture, forestry and fishing, etc. When the pandemic started, the operations of these MSMEs were seriously disrupted. Let's take a look at some statistics taken from the ADB MSME survey, which was conducted in March and April last year. So please focus your attention on the left graph, where you will see that at least 7 out of 10 MSMEs temporarily closed during the early stage of the lockdown. And there were other conditions that MSMEs had to face, namely a drop in domestic demand, a drop in foreign demand, the delay in delivery of products and services, which hit the medium enterprises very hard, disruption of production and supply chain, which is due to the mobility restrictions imposed by government, and cancellation of contracts. It is interesting to note, however, that about 14.5% of micro enterprises and 13% of small businesses actually thought that their operations were better during the pandemic as compared to before the outbreak of COVID-19. When asked whether they had enough savings, liquid assets to sustain their operations, 14.8% of micro enterprises, 19% of small businesses, and 28.7% of medium enterprises said that yes, they had the funds to sustain their operations. So this was consistent with what Erko was saying earlier about how bigger businesses would have more resources that will allow them to, that will tide them over. And but the more important point here is that a great majority of MSMEs either said that they did not have cash and savings anymore or expected their money to run out within a month. When divided across sectors, it's the same story. So a very big proportion of those that were surveyed said that they already had no cash and savings, or that they expected their cash to run out within a month. When asked whether they can borrow 50,000 pesos, maybe to augment their working capital, 71% of the respondents said no, while 29% said yes. And among those who said yes, 47.4% said that it was more difficult to borrow money during that time. Among the different concerns and obstacles faced by MSMEs are listed in this slide, namely the decline in domestic demand continuing over time, the decline in foreign demand continuous over time, the disruption of production, supply chain and business networks, the requirements of tax payments, a lack of working capital to maintain or restart the business, and the repayment of loans. In spite of these different obstacles and challenges, we see that there are some small and medium enterprises who were able to rise above the crisis, including some of those that we interviewed for this study. And therefore, we wanted to know, what is it that these entrepreneurs did? What adjustments did they do? Did they make certain changes in their business models in response to the pandemic? And ERCO talked about how research teams were formed across 5 cities, namely Manila, KL, Bangkok, Wuhan, and London. The next slide will show you the timetable of the global project on entrepreneurial resilience. So basically, during the last quarter of 2020, the team of Professor Urko did a systematic literature review of entrepreneurial resilience and used that as a basis for the framework that he explained earlier. In the Philippines, we did our initial round of interviews around November and December. And then during the first quarter of 2021, we looked at our initial data and came up with several themes that we used as the basis for our first interim report, the highlights of which we are presenting this afternoon. Aside from this virtual workshop that we are holding in Manila, we will have other virtual workshops in other participating countries because we want to solicit inputs from policymakers and entrepreneurs so that we can enrich and validate our findings. By the second quarter of the current year, we will do our second set of interviews, and we will take a look at our data a little bit more closely. And maybe by this time, we will be able to answer the two knowledge gaps that Urko talked about earlier. And again, we will have another round of virtual workshops and outreach events to get inputs from policymakers and entrepreneurs. And then by the end of the third quarter, end of September, we would have come up with a final report that elaborates on tangible firm, community, and policy relevant insights. Now, given the rich qualitative data that we have collected by that time, we also intend to write teaching cases that can be used for entrepreneurship teaching and training.